Joe thinks the worst thing about his upstairs neighbors is the noise. Every night, their apartment seems to shake with a level of enthusiasm he finds impossible to ignore. But when his wife invites those same neighbors downstairs for dinner, the evening becomes much more than an awkward attempt at friendship. Before the night is over, secrets will come out, boundaries will disappear, and Joe and Angela will be forced to confront something far more uncomfortable than anything happening above their ceiling: the truth about their own marriage. Joe and Angela live with their 12-year-old daughter Maggie in a beautiful apartment that once belonged to Joe's parents. From the outside, their life seems comfortable. Inside, however, almost everything between them has become a source of irritation. Joe used to have bigger dreams. Years ago, he played in a band called The Onslaught, and for a brief moment in 2008, one of their songs became popular. Angela was even the woman who inspired that song, but the success disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. These days, Joe teaches music at a small conservatory in the East Bay, and the piano in his own home has become something he barely touches. Angela has changed too. She once studied art and photography, but instead of building a career around it, much of her creative energy now goes into their home. She renovates rooms, finds furniture, buys art, experiments with design, and tries to make the apartment feel alive. And tonight, she is throwing a dinner party. Without properly discussing it with Joe first, Angela has invited their upstairs neighbors, Pina and Hawk, to come over. Maggie is away at a sleepover, giving them the perfect opportunity. Angela sees the dinner as a friendly gesture because the neighbors have tolerated months of renovation noise without complaining. Joe sees things differently. To him, the couple upstairs are already responsible for enough noise of their own. Their extremely active nighttime routine regularly carries through the ceiling, sometimes loudly enough to wake Joe and Angela. Joe has grown increasingly furious about it, while Angela seems strangely fascinated by the whole thing. Even before the guests arrive, the dinner is already falling apart. Joe complains about the food, the apartment, the open windows, the lack of curtains, and especially the neighbors. Angela becomes frustrated because almost every conversation between them turns negative. At one point, she actually makes Joe leave the apartment and come back in so they can try starting the evening again with a better attitude. It doesn't work. Their argument exposes something much deeper. Angela feels like Joe has emotionally withdrawn from their life, while Joe feels surrounded by decisions he never wanted. They barely socialize anymore, they seem permanently annoyed with each other, and neither one knows how to talk without turning the conversation into a fight. Then the doorbell rings. Pina and Hawk arrive, and almost immediately, they feel like the opposite of their hosts. They're warm, expressive, curious, and extremely comfortable with themselves. Pina is Spanish, outspoken and emotionally direct. She works as a psychotherapist and sexologist. Hawk is eccentric, intensely enthusiastic, and almost aggressively friendly. Joe has already decided he dislikes him, mostly because Hawk tries to turn every elevator ride into a conversation. But once dinner begins, something unexpected happens. The guests genuinely love Angela's home. Pina notices the care Angela has put into everything, while Hawk becomes obsessed with one of the rugs. Angela, who rarely receives this kind of validation, starts lighting up. When they discover that she studied art and once took photography seriously, Pina tells her that the creativity she abandoned is still visible everywhere around her. It means far more to Angela than she wants to admit. The conversation becomes increasingly personal. Angela becomes emotional, talking about Maggie eventually growing up and leaving home. When she suddenly experiences what appears to be a hot flash, Pina explains that she may be entering perimenopause and talks openly about the physical and emotional changes women experience. Joe tries to make jokes, but Pina shuts him down quickly. For once, Angela has someone taking her fears seriously instead of turning them into a punchline. Meanwhile, the guests learn more about Joe. They discover his old band, The Onslaught, and the brief success of the song he once wrote about Angela. They also discover that the man who now teaches music used to be far more ambitious. When they suggest playing his old music, Joe becomes visibly uncomfortable. Hawk has his own history. Before reinventing himself, he was a fire captain. After a dangerous incident left him with smoke damage, he eventually walked away from firefighting and began exploring completely different parts of himself, including bodywork and an almost obsessive love of rugs. As everyone drinks more, the evening splits into two conversations. Joe and Hawk smoke together while Angela gives Pina a tour of the apartment. Away from their partners, Angela begins opening up in ways she hasn't with Joe. She tells Pina that she's been struggling with a major decision for months. Pina describes her own previous marriage, explaining that it ended long before she officially left because intimacy disappeared first, then communication, until two people who once loved each other became strangers. Her advice to Angela is simple: stop living on emotional crumbs and pay attention to the life her heart is pulling her toward. Angela doesn't explain exactly what she plans to do, but Pina's words clearly hit something that has been building inside her for a long time. Eventually, everyone comes back together, and Joe decides it's finally time to discuss the real reason he hates living beneath Pina and Hawk: the noise. Surprisingly, the neighbors apologize before he even fully confronts them. They admit things have occasionally become louder than intended. Angela immediately pretends they haven't heard anything. Joe does the same. But Pina and Hawk know that's a lie. Their hidden door camera recorded Joe standing outside their apartment at 3 in the morning, furiously pounding on the door. Cornered by the evidence, Joe finally explodes. He admits that the noise drives him crazy and that even Maggie can hear it. He has been inventing excuses to explain what's happening upstairs, and he is tired of organizing his family's nights around somebody else's sex life. That's when the neighbors reveal that Joe has misunderstood one important detail. The sounds aren't always coming from just Pina and Hawk. There are other people: Vanessa, Kai, sometimes more. Pina and Hawk have recently begun hosting consensual sex parties. Suddenly, everything Joe has been hearing makes sense. Instead of being horrified, he becomes fascinated. They explain that their gatherings are carefully discussed and built around clear boundaries, consent, and communication. People openly establish what they want and what they don't want. Pina describes the idea of compersion, finding pleasure in seeing someone you care about experience pleasure with someone else. Joe, who spent half the night condemning what was happening upstairs, suddenly wants to know everything. He asks how people are invited, how many participate, how jealousy works, and how they decide what everyone is comfortable with. The neighbors explain that sometimes it's only a few people, while larger celebrations have involved many more. For the first time all evening, Joe seems genuinely entertained. But the conversation is about to become much more personal. Hawk casually mentions something about Angela and the window. Joe freezes. It turns out Hawk has seen Angela naked through their windows. At first, Angela tries to make it sound accidental. Then the truth comes out. The first time really was accidental. Angela walked out after a shower, noticed Hawk looking from upstairs, and realized he had seen her. But afterward, she started repeating the walk deliberately, knowing there was a chance he might be watching. She liked it. She liked feeling seen. Joe is furious, but Angela immediately throws the real problem back at him. He barely looks at her anymore. Pina sees Angela's behavior differently. To her, Angela isn't simply trying to attract Hawk, she's trying to reconnect with a part of herself that has disappeared inside her marriage, the part that wants to feel desirable. Then, Pina turns the spotlight onto Joe. She reveals that she has repeatedly caught him staring at her in the elevator. Joe denies that it means anything, but everyone around the table can see the hypocrisy. Angela enjoys Hawk looking at her, Joe enjoys looking at Pina, and both husband and wife have been quietly seeking validation outside their marriage while refusing to acknowledge what's missing inside it. Hawk makes things even more awkward by admitting that he and Pina sometimes talk about Angela during sex. Joe suddenly becomes convinced that the entire dinner was planned by Angela as some elaborate attempt to turn the evening into a sexual encounter. Angela denies it, and, surprisingly, she's telling the truth. Because the actual invitation didn't come from her, Pina and Hawk came downstairs tonight intending to invite both Joe and Angela to join them. They explain that they've sensed attraction in both directions: the looks in the elevator, the moments at the window, the chemistry between all four of them. They find Joe and Angela attractive and want to explore that connection together. There's no pressure, they insist. It doesn't even have to happen tonight. Although they also admit that tonight would work perfectly well. Joe and Angela are stunned. Then, almost immediately, both begin considering it. What follows is one of the strangest negotiations imaginable. Joe approaches the idea almost like a scheduling problem, asking how everything would work. Angela mocks him for practically opening his calendar during an invitation to group sex. Yet underneath the jokes, something real is happening. Both of them want to feel desired. Both are intrigued, and neither wants to be the more frightened person. For a moment, it seems like the night is actually going to go there. But Pina notices something important. Joe and Angela aren't approaching this from a place of trust or intimacy. They're competitive, angry, and desperate to prove something to each other. Pina warns that a sexual experience like this cannot be used as revenge or as a weapon inside a broken relationship. Instead of everyone being together, she suggests they connect separately. Joe agrees to spend time alone with Pina, while Angela is open to doing the same with Hawk. The couples begin to separate, the music comes on, inhibitions drop, and the bizarre dinner finally appears ready to become exactly the kind of night Joe never imagined when he came home. And then Joe's back gives out. He collapses in pain. The entire mood dies instantly. Hawk tries using his bodywork training to help him, which only irritates Joe more. Angela is embarrassed and furious that Joe's chronic back problem has once again become the center of everything. That comment triggers another brutal argument. Pina suggests Joe's back pain might be connected to all the anger he refuses to express. Hawk attempts to empathize with him. Joe wants none of it. Instead, he attacks Hawk's entire identity. He points out that a man constantly preaching honesty isn't even using his real name. And Joe is right. Hawk's legal name is Howard Wilson Kelly. Joe laughs at him until Howard finally explains why he changed it. Years earlier, Howard's wife died from cancer. After her death, he became reckless at work, almost suicidal. During one dangerous moment, he experienced something like his life flashing before his eyes, but what he saw was his marriage. He remembered his wife repeatedly trying to share a more adventurous, sensual side of herself with him, and he remembered how judgmental and insecure he had been. Eventually, she stopped trying to show him that part of herself at all. After losing her, Howard realized he had spent years shutting down someone he loved. He became self-destructive until therapy forced him to choose between continuing toward death or changing the person he had been. He chose change. Becoming Hawk was part of that reinvention. Instead of letting the story affect him, Joe responds with another joke. This time, Pina becomes angry. But then something revealing happens. Pina and Hawk start fighting too. Hawk corrects her English, and Pina explodes over how often he interrupts and corrects her. She accuses him of pushing too hard and failing to listen. Suddenly, the supposedly enlightened couple looks much less perfect. But unlike Joe and Angela, they recognize the conflict almost immediately. Hawk apologizes. Pina tells him clearly what hurt her. They calm down. And that contrast makes the problem in Joe and Angela's marriage impossible to ignore. Pina finally asks them a simple question. When was the last time they had sex? The answer is 1 year ago. Now everything comes out. Joe says Angela kept rejecting him until trying became humiliating, so eventually he stopped. Angela argues that Joe stopped giving her any reason to want him. She says he's miserable every day, emotionally unavailable, bitter about his life, and angry at everyone around him. Joe finally explains what he's been carrying. He feels like a failure. His band failed. His dream of becoming a successful musician disappeared. He lives in the apartment he inherited from his parents, something he sees as evidence that he couldn't build a life for himself. He teaches music at a school he doesn't respect, to students he believes don't care. In his mind, this is simply what his life became, and he sees no reason to pretend he's happy about it. Angela refuses to accept that. She reminds Joe that he still works with music every day. He lives in a beautiful home. Their daughter worships him. He has a family and a life many people would desperately want. His biggest failure, she says, isn't that his band disappeared, it's that he gave up afterward. He won't even touch the piano he once loved. Joe fires back that Angela has wasted her own potential. While Maggie is at school and Joe is working, Angela pours all her energy into the apartment, buying furniture and controlling every detail of their lives. They accuse each other of being responsible for everything they hate about themselves. And that's when Pina finally cuts through it. These were their choices. Joe chose to stop pursuing music. Angela chose the life she built. Neither one gets to make the other person responsible for every disappointment. She asks why they're still married. Their first answer is Maggie, but Pina challenges that too. If the atmosphere in their home is this hostile, their daughter almost certainly feels it. Staying together for the child means very little if the child grows up surrounded by resentment and anxiety. Pina tells them that sometimes people find meaningful new relationships with someone else, and sometimes they manage to create an entirely new relationship with the same person. But one thing is clear: the relationship Joe and Angela have been living in is over. What happens next is their choice. At that point, even Pina realizes she's gone far beyond being a dinner guest. She reminds them she isn't actually their therapist, and she and Hawk finally decide it's time to leave. The evening that began with cheese, wine, and complaints about noisy neighbors ends without the group encounter anyone imagined. Once the apartment becomes quiet again, Joe and Angela sit in the wreckage of the night. There is no dramatic reconciliation. There is no final explosion either. They talk quietly about practical things. A future trip to Tahoe, what Maggie will want. Joe's back, which is already feeling better, cleaning the apartment tomorrow, but their conversation sounds different now because neither of them can pretend anymore. Eventually, Angela says she's exhausted and goes to bed. Joe hesitates and asks whether he should sleep in his office. And that's where the real meaning of the invitation becomes clear. Pina and Hawk came downstairs offering Joe and Angela a completely different kind of sexual relationship. But what they actually gave them was something far more disruptive, a reason to finally look directly at the marriage they already had. Joe spent the evening judging the people upstairs for living too loudly, while he had spent years quietly burying his own disappointment. Angela wanted to feel seen by strangers because she no longer felt seen by her husband. Both believed the other person was responsible for the life they had lost. By the end of the night, nothing is magically fixed. Their marriage may be ending, or this may be the first moment in years when they finally have a chance to build a new one. Either way, the invitation they thought was about sex ultimately forces them to answer a much harder question. Do they still want to choose each other?